Well, quick introduction about who I am and what I do. My name is Dale Crogan. I'm a Mesa Fire captain and paramedic. I've been with the fire department a little over 32 years, and I've been in the fire service for over 34 years. I currently run our peer support program. I've been doing that for a little over a decade. I'm also the president of a nonprofit called Stop Our Stigma, which is a group. Our mission is to reduce suicides in first responders. And the goal of that is to stop the stigma of reaching out for help because we know all of us need help at times. So that's really where this really bleeds in. And listening to the two previous speakers, both Brock and Marcia, were fantastic, and their stories and how they got to the point where reaching out for help really made the difference in their lives. So I think we can jump in. My story, I'll be honest, is really the story of other people. And going back to what Marcia said, what she learned during her struggle well programming is being able to have that story be somebody else's and not be the burden that I carry. But those stories really started around suicides. For me, I was a year on the job when I experienced my first suicide on the job from another firefighter. Unfortunately, since then, I've seen a number of them, with the last one just being this summer. But understanding that this is still a part of the stress that we carry and the burden that we carry, and that it really starts with reaching out for help and making sure that we understand that. And I think to really understand how do we reach out for help, we have to really start by understanding who we are, right? Or who the community sees us as, and then how do we become the person who we ultimately needs that help and reaches out for that. So we'll start. I have a couple of slides here, but I have a tendency to talk around all of them. So I apologize if I don't stay on script. And even more importantly, both Dr. Dara and Marcia let a curse word slip, which I've tried to be very good at that. But I did read a study from Harvard that says people who cuss live longer. So you guys are screwed. They're going to pop out no matter what. So let's start. If you have questions, please throw them in the comments. I'd love to hear. Uh, as first responders, who are we? How did we get here? And what do we need to do to move forward? And I think that's important to know, right? And it's really who does the community think that we are, right? We're the heroes, we're the rescuers of our community, right? We've heard the cliche of running into a building while somebody else is running out, or running in towards danger while somebody else is running out. And all this is applicable for all of us as first responders. When I talk about first responders, I talk about law enforcement, I talk about corrections, I talk about fire, EMS, paramedics, talk about doctors, nurses. We are all lumped into that same community, which is a wonderful community to belong to. But this is what the community sees, right? We deal with things that other people don't. We're the fixers. We're the ultimate problem solvers, and we do it well. As a matter of fact, we kind of sit around and wait until trouble happens, and then we go out and fix it. And we do it in a way that is really not the norm out there. So it builds this idea that we bring these strengths to the table inherently, right? We're able to handle stress better than other people. We're able to deal with trauma better than other people. It's almost that way of saying we were born to do this. We're the first ones to get picked when we're developing a team or a program, right? We live in chaos. Chaos feels normal to us. That high anxiety sort of hyper vigilant focus is really what makes us tick at times, or at least this is what we believe, right? And how did we become this way is equally as important. And I think for all of us, it starts really when we got hired. And I know there's some anomalies that get hired when they're in their 30s and 40s, but really most of us are kids when we get hired. Half of us, heck, our brains aren't even fully developed. We're in the age group of about 25, and we're just starting to finally make good decisions in our lives. And now all of a sudden we're thrown into this career of being a first responder. So we start with the training. We start with understanding what the career is going to bring to us. What are we going to see? What are we going to deal with? And we start building this skill set of tolerance, really. And we learn to work in the worst conditions imaginable. We learn to function on little to no sleep. We learn to cope and deal with stress in a different way than everybody else does. At least this is what we feel like we've learned, what we've been taught, and how we've been able to function, right? And I think the flip side to that is that's really not who we are, right? And Who are we really? We are the people that at some point in our career, and we can talk about, going back to the academy and getting hired and getting trained, as you come out of that environment, you're you're in the best shape of your life. You're making the best money you've ever made. You're working with people that you enjoy working with. You're able to do things that are unbelievably special. And we start believing that we're different. We start believing that we're a little bit better, right? Like Marcia said, it's always the youngest ones that are working shift work. As firefighters and EMS, we work 24-hour shifts. But as law enforcement, it's those graveyards that are killing us. But we find ourselves in a place and in a time where we can handle all of that. I can work 4 shifts in a row and still go out and do the things that I want to do, right? We end up probably partying more than we did before we got hired. We're able to work these unbelievable schedules and still feel like we're getting enough rest. We're still going to the gym. We're still taking care of our honeydew list. We're doing all the things that we want to do. And we know at some point in our career that just isn't healthy anymore. And that's really where we start seeing the change. And I think that's the important part to realize, really, who are we really? We're people with very low tolerance. We have incredible tolerance for ourselves, but we have very low tolerance for the rest of the community. We're quick to anger. Anger is the go-to emotion. Marcia talked about depression. And I think for most of us, our depression is disguised as anger because anger is comfortable for us. If you think about it, we sit around and we wait. We wait until something bad happens. We wait until somebody calls us and they need us to come solve their problem. We jump up, we go code 3, a million miles an hour to go solve somebody's problem in 20 minutes. And then we come back and we have a sandwich. We're ready to go. And the reason that feels so good is because we're able to focus in that area, right? Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, our focus sort of narrows, and we can pinpoint what we need to do. We function very, very well that way. Unfortunately, it's that same feeling when we get angry, when we get frustrated. Our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up. We start to focus in on what the issue is, and we know we can take care of it. And that's typically why we see so many of us fall to that emotion of anger, right? Our compassion fades. We carry the physical and mental pain with us all the time. Um, we end up in a situation where we take more risks than we need to. We end up in a situation where we're trying to disconnect from everything that we can because we know that it's going to rev us up. Marcia talked about the ability to grow in her program was about the ability to connect. And we do so much work that tries to disconnect us with what's happening, right? I don't want to see what I'm seeing. I don't want to feel what I'm feeling. I want to feel good all the time. And when I go to work, I can put everything else in life in a box and I can function well this way. And that tends to start bleeding out into the other things that we do, right? We in our relationships, our partners, our spouses, our children, our outside activities. It's just easier to pull away from those things so that I don't end up getting frustrated, angry, exploding, carrying the guilt of doing some of those things. So I think it's important to start off with those comments. Like, who are we? Who does the community see us? How did we get there? Right? And then really who we are deep down inside. You think about it, a lot of us, we spend a lifetime going out and helping people in the community. And a lot of these people we really don't like. And I think that becomes another burden that we carry. And it's hard to get around that sometimes because you go home and you get this praise and you get this love, and you go out to the community and you get those things, and you feel like you're a bit of a fraud because you don't feel the same way about some of these people that we're out there helping every single day. And that becomes that struggle sometimes on how to stay connected in the work that we're doing and not just focused on the bad part or the trauma part of what we're seeing. The reality of it is, this really isn't our fault, right? Who we are, who we've become, these are the things that make us great first responders. The hard part is that we oftentimes find ourselves connecting with what is the community's perspective of us versus what our real perspective of us is. And when you think about it, I talk about coming into this career at a very young age, and you could have been any sort of person growing up. And now all of a sudden, you're a hero, you're a warrior, right? You're a savior, you're a mentor, right? You're a role model. Can you imagine being 25 years old and having everybody around you excited about what you're doing, right? When you start the fire academy or the police academy, the first thing you get is, oh my gosh, my son's becoming a firefighter, or my daughter's becoming a police officer. They tell your parents tell everybody. You get praised by everywhere you go, right? You immediately get some sort of Christmas gift that's either blue or red and wrapped up around the career that we do. We wear a sticker on our truck, or we have a license plate that represents us, and it just continues to grow in the community. And it is a wonderful thing. And it is nice to be appreciated. And it's wonderful that we get the care and the support that we need to do the job. But it also becomes part of an ego that we have to outlive. Because you can go and be a horrible person and then show up at Cafe Rio and get a discount on your meal and thanks for your service, being given thanks for your service. You can go out and do something at work that you're embarrassed about, or you didn't feel like you held up your end of the bargain, and the first person you see on the street waves to you and tells you how amazing you are. You think about it, being 25 years old and having kids show up at your house for Halloween dressed up like you, right? Kids at schools that you've never even met before are writing you heartfelt letters about the job that you're doing, right? When 9/11 comes around every year, or when some of these months where we're supporting first responders, we get all of this praise, and it becomes this identity of who we think we should be, when really we're just ordinary people. And I think that's one of the parts that adds the most stress to us on a regular daily level. You take that on top of the fact that we're seeing all of these traumatic things, right? We're exposed to things every single day, and we're struggling with what we see, but we're also struggling with the person that we are. Marsha, again, she talked about the guilt and the shame that we carry. As that starts to grow in us over time, it just lends itself to being a heavier rucksack, more rocks in that backpack that you're carrying. And these are things that we typically don't share with people. Why? Because it feels good. And I think that's a big part of when I talk about what is our responsibility. I think our responsibility is to make sure that we understand that we're ordinary people, right? We're ordinary people that have given an opportunity to do an extraordinary job. We stress the same way other people do. We bleed the same way other people do. We feel the same way other people do. We have to remind ourselves that we are just that. We're not always the hero, the warrior, right? The savior, the role model. We are just everyday ordinary people. We've just been given the opportunity and the training to do an extraordinary job. And I think the ability to keep some of these things in perspective earlier in our career gives us the capacity to see and deal with more as our career goes on. And that's one of the other differences that we see, is that our career lasts a lifetime. Most of us do this job longer than we've done anything else in our life. And it becomes a huge identity. Marsha talked about living behind the badge, or living with the ego of the badge. It's hard to separate. You find that your best friends are people that you work with. Half of us, end up dating or marrying people that we work with. We go on vacations with people that we work with. We have barbecues, we have bar mitzvahs, we have christenings, you name it. It's typically around the community of a first responder. That's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But when we do that, we also sometimes lose the ability to have perspective of what everybody else in life is going through. So I think learning this perspective at a very young point or early point in our career kind of sets us up to just create more capacity to deal with the overall job stress. And I think as we go through this career, right, it ebbs and flows, and we understand that. The pressures sometimes get so high that they feel like we're going to burst, right? It's like that soda bottle that's been shaken up and the lid's tightened onto it. And then there are other times where we really feel like we're in our wheelhouse and we're super successful at what we're doing. We're promoting, we're moving through the ranks, we're achieving good things, we're helping people, and we find ourselves going through this in a normal, natural way. But if we don't have the ability to create capacity when we need it, we have a hard time being able to absorb that stress and process it, and being able to grow from it, just like Marsha and just like Brock were saying earlier, when we learn those skills, we learn them early enough, we're able to put them into play. And I think that's important. And whether you're looking at a program like Struggle Well, which is just fantastic, or whether you're looking at One Tree or military after deployment, there are so many programs out there that talk about resiliency and what it is. But I think it's important to break down the skills of what resiliency is and be able to work and focus on those things. So for me, when I talk about the fact that we're not superhuman, um, we have to be able to put that into context as to what are we. And I think what we are or have the ability to be is very resilient people, both at home and at work. So I put a slide in here um, about how do we do this? How do we build some of these skills, right? How do we learn to lean on others for help? How do we create that strong support system? When do we know when? How do we know when to use our support system? And I think that's one of the keys, right? First, it's about building the skills, right? Then it's about how do we learn how to reach out for help? Um, a support system, really, if you think about it, is very similar to kind of a tightrope in life, right? If you're walking down a tightrope of your career, you want a net to support you underneath. And that net is made up of a variety of different squares that all have a number of different purposes. Some are very tight and stretchy in the middle so you don't fall through. The ones at the end are very strong and robust and don't flex at all, and they're anchored into the ground. So every part of that system has its own function. And I think that's the big part about learning how to build a support system is what does that look like for you? So that when you do need to use it, you know how to use it and you're willing to reach out and use it. So when we talk about some of these things, I apologize. This slide is cut off a little bit, but it's pretty simple and basic when we're talking about this. I think Struggle Well does an amazing job of using a triangle to talk about what those resilient skills are. I also think Brock did a great job of talking about what's important to him, and that's home, that's health, that's community and spirit. And I think here's just one more example of things that are important to us, and that's empathy, and that's perspective taking. Also, it's the basics, learning how to sleep, learning how to eat, those normal everyday functions that keep most of us going. But I think at the end of it, the biggest part that we need to focus on is what is a support system, right? And how do you utilize it? And for me, I think the first thing that you need to do is realize one, that you're ultimately going to need a support system. You're going to need someone or something to lean on and being open to that. So I think that for me personally started at home. I had to learn how to communicate with my partner and my spouse now. For me, I struggled at the very beginning because I wanted to share everything. And by doing that, she became very turned off to some of the ways that I deal and cope with things, right? Through humor, through some other things. As a matter of fact, I'll tell a very horrible story that I was lovingly involved with, but we had a gentleman who was a regular frequent flyer here in Mesa for decades. He ended up passing away, and the hospital was kind enough to send us over a cake for his death. It was referred to as a bum cake. I thought at the time it was very humorous, and I came home and I shared that story in mixed company. I then proceeded later on that evening to have another cake that had some very kind words about this individual, and we had a moment of silence and a celebration of life for this person. And for me, it was that moment that I realized, or I thought I realized, that I can't share with my partner or my spouse or my what I thought was my support system everything that I feel because they're not going to understand. And that ended up shutting me down for really over a decade on how I shared about work and the stresses that I felt at work, which ultimately led me to not being able to communicate about the stresses I felt at home, the stresses I felt in the family, the stresses I felt with kids, the stresses I felt with finances. So I had never prepared myself to really be able to use a support system and evaluate it so that I could benefit from it. And I have to tell you, it took me a while to figure that out. It was pretty embarrassing when I finally realized uh, to myself that I can't fix everything, right? That I'm not the ultimate fixer. I don't have all the solutions. And it was hard because that's what we do every single day. It doesn't matter what the problem is. When they call 911, we show up, regardless of why they call, and we fix their problem. Period. We don't tell them, you know what? We can't fix that. Your house is flooding, we'll fix it. You're having a heart attack, we'll fix it. Somebody's getting arrested, we'll fix it. Whatever the situation is, we're there to fix it for them and make sure they feel comfortable. And I found myself realizing that I can't fix my own problems and struggling with the idea of how do I go back to work and fix other people's problems. Because originally, the best place for me to be was at work because I felt like a king. I felt like a warrior. I felt like that person who could manage people, manage problems, and still function at a high level. So it took a while to really learn how to understand what a support system is and how do we use a support system. So for me, I had to identify what I was lacking in my life, what attributes, what abilities, what things I didn't have. And then I had to look for people in my life that had those other characteristics and really try to identify, okay, if I needed help in this area, how would I lean on them? And it opened my eyes to how many of those people lean on me for things that I didn't realize that I was showing up for in their life. And through that time and through that practice, it really made a difference on how I started structuring my support system and how I learned how to use that support system and make sure that I had the capacity in my life to actually reach out for help when I needed it. So I think when I look back at my career and not to mimic any of the other speakers that have been through here, but living some of those same struggles and being exposed to a lot of those same traumas, and then having to go through that life-changing treatment at some point as well. Like Marsha, I went through ketamine. Like Brock, I went through counseling. I've done a lot of the work, but it really didn't sink in until I was able to really learn how to reflect on myself. And by doing that, I was able to give myself more capacity to receive whatever trauma, whatever stress, whatever issues were coming my way, because I knew I had support somewhere else to help me deal with that if I couldn't on my own. And I think that's one of the big parts about being a first responder, um, that is difficult to come to. And again, I go back to the idea that everyday stress is the what compounds us the most, whether it be relationships, whether it be finance, whether it be substance abuse, whether it be kids, all of those things, so that when the big traumas do hit, we don't have the capacity to process those and receive those and to work through those. And that's again why we definitely have to find ourselves in a place where we're building these support systems. So I would challenge all of us as we're in the roles that we are, whether that's the role of a peer support, whether that's the role of leadership, whether that's the role of clinician, is to really work with first responders on how do we develop this. Because when you look at these programs, Marcia did a great job of explaining it too. I hate to keep leaning on Marcia, but I thought her testimony and her presentation was so good. But Struggle Well talks about this 3 to 5, this very close network of friends that you have that you can confide in and rely on. I think for me, what I ended up having to find out is that I needed to have a cluster of those. And I always thought that family and friends would be enough. But what I realized is that I also needed programs and I needed professionals as part of my support system. So I needed to make sure that I had a clinician that I could trust and rely on. I needed to make sure that I had programs out there that I knew would be supportive of what I was going through so that I felt comfortable reaching out to them. I had to do the research in order to build this Rolodex of resources and support so that when I needed to take off the cape, I needed to take off the uniform, I needed to release the pressure of the job, I had somewhere to go with it. And I think that was a big moment for me, which in turn helped me create a better environment for the people that I work with and that I work around, and the ability to listen and figure out what resources, or at least being able to point them in the direction of what resources they may need. Questions along the way, please throw them into the comment. I'm trying to read the comments as we go. Um, I threw this slide up not because these are my closing comments, but I think this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Resiliency isn't built, it's given. Or excuse me, resiliency is built, it's not given. Support systems keep us strong, but really learning how to use those support systems are the key. Our community provides us an amazing opportunity to get involved and be impactful in so many different ways. And I think we owe our community not just the ability to do the job, but be able to stay healthy enough to do the job well long term.
But, I also have questions on your service because you've been in service for a long time. What has kept you going through what has propelled you? We talked about the why, right, for everybody. Tell us a bit about your journey as to why you got into this in the first place. And, I mean, you've been through a lot of calls for service.
That's a great question, and I think it is important. What is the why? And I think the why started with me personally, from a few deaths that I experienced as a young first responder, and the opportunity to transition at a point in my career where the physical work of being on a fire truck felt daunting, to flip to go from serving the community to serving the people that serve the community was the most powerful thing I could have done at that point in my career. And I think even today, our programs have grown exponentially because the city, the the department have continued to trust what we're doing.
And so, as you kept going through the career, were there times in your career that you felt like this isn't for me anymore? I want to get out. Um, and then what kept you in if that did happen?
Yes, I'm fortunate enough that my whole family was law enforcement prior to me becoming a firefighter. So I apologize to the rest of you, but I tell my dad all the time I made the right decision. Um, but I think for me, really, where it became a lot is when I felt like I no longer wanted to be at work because I was so much underwater at home, and I didn't feel like I had the capacity to deal with what was going on at home, the kids, the spouse, the finances. I felt like if I could just alleviate this part of my life, then I would be better at home. And what worried me about that is I just had a friend pass away in 2018 from suicide. Excuse me. And he was living that life where everything became too much. And I thought, I don't want to find myself there. And at that point, I was new into this part of my career as the peer support side, and I felt like every tragedy, every trauma, every story that was coming in the door, it wasn't that I could not just relate to it, but I could visualize it, I could smell it, I could taste it. And at that point, I thought I have to do something different. And that's when I really started doing the work on my own or with my support system to try and develop the skills and the resources to stay here because I knew this is where I wanted to be. And so often we hear from, especially law enforcement, but firefighters as well, as they always wait until they retire to get better, right? We start that early. When I retire, I'll be able to sleep. When I retire, I'll be able to fish more. When I retire, I'll be able to do this. When I retire, I'll be able to lose weight and get healthier. I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want to wait until I retired because I knew I still wanted to do the job I was given the opportunity to do. And I think that really helped keep me going at a time where I felt like the the trauma was truly outweighing some of the other things. And it really helped change my perspective too when I look at other facets of first responders. And hearing people come through the door and talk about their stresses and their trauma, and me so easily being able to put myself there, um, it actually caused me to really step back and look at dispatchers in a whole different light. And I felt like maybe before that I had tons of compassion, but it really wasn't until that moment that I realized they feel everything that we feel. They see it because they can put themselves in that same spot, even though they didn't have to go through it in the same way that that first responder did. So that was a big enlightening part for me as well, is looking at that community more as a whole and thinking there's more work to be done out there.
Yeah, well said, Dill. Before I get to these questions that are in here too, I think that a lot of folks who don't work in fire service may not really understand that only about 10% of the calls that come out really are for fire calls, and a vast majority of the calls then are for EMS type calls. And when you have a firefighter that joins to say, "Hey, I want to fight fires. I want to get in there. I want to drag a hose. I want to be the hero," right? They quickly sometimes get disheartened saying, "Shit, I didn't realize I was going to have to run so many EMS calls." And the EMS calls are tedious calls, right? Because what do they come out as? Chest pain, stomach pain. And so, then you get to the scene, and then a lot of firefighters get frustrated after a while because there's like, just take food before you take your medications and you wouldn't get stomach pain, right? You know the calls that we get on these types of calls, right? And I say we, 'cause I've been on these calls many times. But those types of calls are the frustration type calls that earlier on we were talking about the thousand cuts. And I think that people don't realize in a fire culture, especially for EMS based calls, that takes a toll on you, correct?
A significant toll. Yes, absolutely correct. Is and the environment of what we train for in the academy versus what we end up doing day to day out in the field is significantly different. And the tedious part of the job is that EMS sort of side of things. Everybody wants to go out and help somebody if they're having a heart attack or if they're significantly injured, but it's that person who says, "Hey, I've been having a stomach ache for 4 days and it's now 2 o'clock in the morning," and they call us because they want to go to the hospital because of a stomach ache. Most of our guys start to lose their mind. And it's interesting because I think we are all more comfortable talking about burnout now than we ever were. But
Mm-hmm.
I think when we go in the community and we talk about burnout, the community immediately sees that as trauma. It sees that as big, giant exposures. Where for
Mm-hmm.
most of us, it's the system. It's the system of 911, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the people that came before us that created the 911 system back in the 70s and early 80s created a system that allows anybody anytime to pick up the phone and call 911. We teach it in our schools, right? We put it, it's a free call on any phone. Don't get charged for it. And everybody at the fire station has a way to fix that problem, how to not have to go back out on these calls. But I also think that as we've learned to get smarter, right? And when I say smarter, not that we're a bunch of brainiacs now, but smarter about the way the system works, it becomes even more frustrating because we talk about, well, who's paying for the ambulance trip, right? What tax dollars are being done? Why are the resources being used for that? We're looking at cutting money from the budget, but we still have to go out on these sort of calls. If we could eliminate these calls, we wouldn't have to cut people from the budget. We wouldn't have, and the frustration begins to build and build and build and build. And again, I think that is what helps zap that our capacity to deal with the bigger stressful calls when they come in. We're already running at such a high level. And I think we're comfortable there. I go back to what I said earlier. We're comfortable being agitated. We're comfortable being a little bit angry, right? That hypervigilance kicks in, and that's like our comfort zone. And I think that's across the board for first responders. If I'm going to go anywhere, that's where I want to go first because I know I can do it. And where the rubber meets the road is in that space for most of us.
So true, man. One of the initiatives that we have is really to stop the stigma of not getting help and then to make sure that people aren't dying by suicide. And I think that a precursor to that truly is burnout. When we talk about stages of burnout, it starts with that negative emotions, it starts with the negativistic thinking, and then we start to see people blaming. And so what you described just now is truly getting up to a higher end of burnout, which is we start to hate the people we work with, we start to hate the public that we serve, we start to hate the administration, and everything becomes negative. And now we start figuring out, how do I save the taxpayers' dollars by shortcutting us having to go on these types of calls, right? Uh, but it's not really that. That was never really the goal. It was just that they're sick and tired and they get burnt out.
Absolutely. I think that that's a bigger part of our culture and probably a harder part to change than anything else. Because as we talk about culture and we talk about change, right? Brock said it earlier, it really starts from the top down. And what does that look like for us? And if your leadership buys into that same mentality, we often think that leadership should be better, right? We are really the only true organizations in most businesses where everybody at the top came from the bottom, right? You don't come out of school and become a fire chief. You don't come out of school and become a police chief. You have to go through the system. And I think we forget sometimes that they carry those same frustrations all the way through. So it does have to start at the top. But once you get to the top, it's more irritating when the people at the bottom are screaming and yelling about it. And then it becomes this battle, to your point, of you no longer understand, you've changed. I used to ride on a fire truck with you, and now all of a sudden you're telling me all of these things that I'm doing that are wrong. And that again just adds to that level of frustration, which then adds to the burnout. In my career, early in my career, I'd never heard of anybody that was ready to retire when their retirement date showed up.
Yeah.
Today, I have people with 10 years on and 17 years on that are so looking forward. They have the countdown on their computer, can't wait to get out of here.
Mhm.
And that has changed. And I think instead of always focusing on how do we fix that change, I think we have to go back and focus on how do we stay healthy within that change and how do we create that opportunity.
Yeah, well said. Let's get some questions that you have in the question and answer section here. So, in creating your support system, did you find a few friends that were not first responders? And if so, was it beneficial or hurtful to you or them?
It was The answer is yes, and it was extremely beneficial for me because originally when I sought for support, I really felt like I needed like-minded people. And I felt like the only people that were like-minded were people that shared what I was experiencing through the same job. But what I found is that limited me on understanding how other people cope and other people deal with situations. So looking for people that are outside of the first responder world, for me personally, was a significant benefit. It helped change my perspective because it wasn't just about them offering help, but it was about them asking me what my problem was. Why do I see it that way? I think this goes back to that idea of burnout. Me showing up at somebody's front door and saying, "Hey, I'm burned out. I need help." I don't need a shot of whiskey. What I need is for somebody to ask me what it is that's causing me this burnout. And for them to not understand, they had to dig, which made me open up more, which was a significant benefit for me. So the answer to that question is absolutely.
Hmm. Thank you. What kind of system should a department have that would encourage officers learning off of each other? Also, what there was a slide just before the support system slide that they missed. If you want to go back a few slides, Taylor was asking about that.
Sure. See if I can bring that slide up. I apologize, it was cut off. These are some what we would consider some very basic resiliency skills, right? Starting with behavior at the beginning and running more into um, more cognitive skills towards the end. This is just one of many programs that are out there, but I think it's important to show that resiliency isn't just a definition. I think when we think about resiliency, we think, the ability to bounce back. Well, what are the tools that we need to bounce back? And each one of these skills have multiple tools within them that we need to learn and practice. And I think empathy is probably the one that stands out the most. You can't just be empathetic. You actually have to be a number of different things. You have to be a good listener. You have to be able to connect with people. You have to be able to not judge people, right? And these are the things that we already do well. We're trained to walk into a room and judge. We're trained to walk into a scene and assess immediately from a distance before anybody even talks. So it's hard sometimes to get ourselves into those positions where we're actually learning some of the skills in a different way that we already have because we do these skills well, but we may not use them in the same way. I like one of these programs because they're both leadership and resiliency at the same time. So you have the opportunity to see some of these skills in different ways.
Yeah, great. We have Kerwin Ince, who is from St. Vincent and the Grenadines in their fire service. And, it's funny, no matter where you live, and I found this too training internationally, is that you could pick a department or an agency, and it's the same issues no matter where you are in the world. That's been the most bizarre things. And so, it's funny because he said, did someone tell you I was here? You're speaking directly to me. Same issues come up in fire service in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I bet. So yeah, I'm glad that he's on here and you guys could connect as well to be able to talk about similarities and differences.
Yeah, and to that point, Dr. Dara, when we talked about the burnout and this being the same all over, I think that kind of goes back to the idea of who we are as problem solvers. And when we're at work specifically, we're trying to solve the problem of what the issue is, where sometimes we need to figure out how do we remove ourselves because the problem just is unsolvable. And as first responders, that's not an answer. That's not a solution. Is to not fix a problem. I don't care if I'm a plumber or not. I'm going to fix a broken toilet, right? Uh, we're going to make sure we can fix whatever the problem is, and I think that continues to add to that burnout. And to your point, I don't wherever Kerwin is, these problems are the same.
Yeah,
We
that's
have to figure out a way to separate enough so that we often think about constantly wanting to disconnect, right? Disconnect from work, disconnect from life, disconnect from finances. For those of us who struggle at home, we go to work so we can disconnect from home, right? Hey, I'm
mm,
busy. I don't have time for this. Those of us who are struggling at work, we want to go home so we can disconnect from work. We miss that opportunity in the middle to actually connect with something. And I
yeah.
think that's what really starts building the strength to deal with all the other issues.
Yeah, yeah, well said. A few more questions here. So, can you speak to the stigma from the older generations that then become the officers, chiefs of younger generations that do want to seek mental health services, but don't feel supported by their own command staff?
I think that's a great question. And I think that was talked about early on too with Brock about should this come from the top down or from the bottom up.
Right, right.
And I actually wrote it down because I think they have to meet in the middle. I
Mm,
think when we started rolling out different programs here in Mesa, we focused some of our training specifically on our 20 and up years on folks, whether they were firefighters, engineers, captains, chiefs, doesn't matter, because they have that time on, and really tried to educate them on how influential their words are, right? Not about buying into mental health, not about buying into some of the cultural changes, but how influential their words are when it comes to the younger people, and understanding when somebody comes up and they're looking for something or asking for something, that your words impact them for their next 20 years. So we did that by kind of going back and rolling back what were the things that they learned at 2, 3, 4 years on the job that they're still doing today, or at least repeating today, right? Rub some dirt on it, you'll be fine, right? Putting some of these things into that slang or coin phrase terms of push it aside. Um, and what we have found is that we had so many people, just like law enforcement, late in their career that were actually at that point of like, here's where I need help. So we really worked on making some of those people spokespeople for the programs. And some of them are willing to get up and give testimony. Some of them are more behind the scenes. And if I have somebody struggling, I can send them to them to have that coffee talk and really be able to explain what they went through privately. But I think we do have to have both because the younger generation wants the help. I had a young man in my office just 6 months ago, and the comment that he made really resonated with me. He's like, I'm struggling, but I don't feel like I've earned my trauma yet. Like I haven't seen enough to be struggling this bad. And it just kind of blew my mind a little bit in the sense of, is this the mentality that's out there?
yeah,
um, and that's horrible and unfortunate. So for us, we try to really kind of do both, right? We try to train from the top. We get the buy-in from the top. We started in our organization with a pledge from leadership that says everybody in leadership signed willingly. I didn't twist any arms. But that we take mental health serious and we're willing to dedicate time and finances to programming.
yeah,
And I think that really settled some of the waves, but then really educating the young folks at the very early stage. We do this in the academy with them throughout their first year and their second year, so that the comfort level, that stigma of reaching out is not there.
yeah.
And that's the biggest part I think that we can change.
And that's exactly what that QR code is on your back screen, right? Which is take the pledge, stop our stigma.
Yes,
So anybody could take that and pledge to say, hey, I commit to stopping the stigma of people receiving help.
absolutely. We actually went around and we've had over 150 chief officers around the state sign the pledge and to supporting mental health and stress in the first responder world or in their
Here.
department specifically. Yeah.
We only have a couple more minutes left, and then I'll let you respond to the other things separately. But we have somebody here who's a spouse of a fire engineer, wondering how could they be supportive to the firefighter in service to
I
protect them.
I love this person, and whoever they are, please reach out to me personally, because I think that is one of the areas that we miss in so much. In my role currently, in the last 4 years, it has almost been a 50-50 split of resources for family members and the first responder. And I think so often our family is told you have to support your first responder, right? You have to give them this and give them that and understand this and support them, support them, support them. We really want to do is this the same, but on the other side, we want our first responders to understand they also need to support their family, right? They have to be better at communicating. They have to be better at being conscious of what's going on. They have to be better of how what they do impacts their family, and not in a way to hide that, but in a way to open that up. So to this spouse of an engineer, I think that the first thing that we can do is recognize that reaching out for help is the hardest thing, and starting with the basics, right?
Mhm.
What are some of the basic things that my partner or my spouse can reach out and help with? How can I get them to ask for more help, even if they have the resources to get it done? Just knowing that opens the door up for so many other things. But
Yeah,
I
I
would
like
love to
that,
talk
man.
to them personally.
Yeah, and I think that that would be further communication for sure. There are little things that I appreciate too. Like if I go to work and I have an early morning, my wife might make me a sandwich. Those little things actually make a big difference, especially when trying to rush out the door, because then you don't have to think about one extra thing to do. There are a lot of things I think you could do that they're not costly things, but they're meaningful things, and people appreciate those gestures and stuff when you have a really busy schedule, and I think that spouses and partners could step in to help. Like I often think too, just to answer this question too, Dale, is that it's nice to have a competent and feel confident that you have a competent partner at home that's going to hold down the fort, so you don't have to worry about the fort. You don't have to worry about the family. Like things are getting taken care of on autopilot because my partner is so strong, you know?
Absolutely, and I think understanding those roles, it's very rare nowadays to not have both partners working in a family, right?
Yeah.
It's just hard to do. So understanding how you can support one another, I think makes a huge difference. It did in my life, is understanding what I needed on certain times and being able to ask for it, but also me understanding what my wife needed and me feeling comfortable when she asked for it and it conflicted with what I wanted to do. Right.
Yeah.
That was a big change for me.
Yeah. It's not only Dale's way.